Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're joining us from around the world. Thank you for joining another Microsoft Reactor live stream event. My name is Michael Watson. I'm the regional lead for the Microsoft Reactor program in the Asia Pacific, and it's my absolute pleasure to welcome you again to join us. Today, I'll be joined by Dave Glover. Dave is a principal cloud advocate based in Sydney and works with a number of developer communities to support their growth on the Microsoft products and services. Dave is a passionate software developer with interest in AI, embedded platforms, cloud systems, IoT, you name it. Dave has had some experience with it in his over 30 years at Microsoft. And today we have a great opportunity to hear from Dave around the overview of Azure OpenAI Services, which, as we all know, is a very hot topic at the moment. Before we kick off, I just want to cover off the Microsoft Reactor Code of Conduct. I just want everyone to acknowledge that this is an event that we want to encourage all to participate in. So there is Q&A, so please ensure that you put your Q&A in the comments and we'll endeavour to get to those as we can. But please remember that we are being joined by a number of people, so be respectful of everyone and please do not make any inappropriate comments. Without further ado, I will now hand over to Dave, and this should be a fantastic session. So as I said, please share your questions. And we will now pass to Dave. So I'll let Dave. Hello, Dave.
Hey, thanks, Michael.
It's all yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much. 30 years makes me feel quite old, actually. Anyway, so I'm a cloud developer advocate. I'm based in Sydney, Australia. And as Mike said, I've been involved in a lot of areas over the years, and really kind of around the internet age and the mobile age and things like that, a whole lot of inflection points that we've seen across the technology arena over the last 30 years, 40 years. And I would say that we're kind of reaching another one of these inflection points with AI. So this is kind of what, I guess, why you're tuning in and why there's a lot of interest out there around AI at the moment. So this session here is an overview of Azure OpenAI Service, and hopefully I can answer your questions. Now, there is an opportunity to ask questions. I will try and keep a bit of a question. I'll try and keep a bit of an eye on the questions. And if it seems appropriate, I will answer kind of in stream. Otherwise, I'll answer questions at the end. Now, also do feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. That seems to be like the preferred place for most people nowadays. And I'm David Glover. And you can find me on LinkedIn as Gloveboxes as my alias, and on Twitter at @dglover. But as I said, Twitter seems to be coming, LinkedIn seems to be coming to place for folk to congregate. So really, not a day goes past without some sort of AI headline capturing our attention. And really these models and the AI and OpenAI has really captured people's attention. If you think about this technology, we saw with OpenAI, we saw within the first week of it being generally available, there was something like 1 million new people signing up onto that service. And in 2 months, there was 100 million people signed up and using ChapGPT and OpenAI. So there's been, and in fact, I think across history, or certainly the history of technology, it's one of the fastest rising apps in technology. So not only has there been an appetite from consumers, but there's also an appetite for businesses who are looking at ways in which they can automate business processes or collaborate with AI to improve productivity and customer services. So as I mentioned before, we really are at an inflection point. And I would say it's as big as what we saw with things like the printing press, the Industrial Revolution, the advent of the microprocessor, the internet. We've got mobile technology. All of those areas, we saw a huge shift in the way in which we live our lives, in which we communicate, way we use technologies, the way we run our businesses. And I really do firmly believe that what we're seeing now is AI is kind of making that breakthrough from more niche cases to where folk and businesses are looking to adopt these technologies within their day-to-day lives and running their businesses. And really, if you are running a business, then really you should be thinking about, okay, obviously you've got today's business to be running, but you need to be thinking about, well, how can I improve these processes or reduce my costs or improve productivity by using AI. Now, ChapGPT and OpenAI did not come out of a vacuum, and these things did not happen overnight. So you can really go back into the 1950s, when people started, when obviously technology and computing started to become a bit more available, though obviously very limited hardware capabilities, very limited software. But back then, this kind of concept of artificial intelligence was really the field of computer science that seeks to create intelligent machines that replicate or exceed human intelligence. And that was kind of what the thinking was back then. And of course, very limited capability. But we did see the kind of the advent of things like expert systems or decision support systems, where they were kind of mimicking the behavior of maybe human processes, probably very much rule-based, but certainly very much back then, the ideas around what could we do around having machines kind of emulate intelligence. Kind of following that, really as a subset of that, we talk much more around machine learning. Now, machine learning is much more about what we call algorithm approximation. So you've got a whole lot of data, and let's take an example of properties and house prices. You think about house prices, and you might have the number of rooms, the number of bathrooms, the number of car parking spaces, and all these types of things. And then you might see, well, historically, that house for that set of features would sell for this amount of money. And the way machine learning worked would look at all these data points, and I'm just picking house prices as an example. You would look at all that, and then you would approximate an algorithm to say, okay, well, I've got an algorithm that approximates this, and if I go and put in this number of bedrooms and this number of car parks and etc., then I can generate a prediction for the house price. And that was very much around the idea of machine learning. And again, that's been applied for a whole range of things. Insurance policies would be a great example. What premium am I going to charge for this person based on these health factors, their risk factors, their lifestyle, whatever it might be, to come up with a premium. So you can kind of see that machine learning has been used in a wide range of areas across business and across our lives for quite some time. Now, this kind of got even more interesting in the 2000s with something we call deep learning. Now, this is very much about building mathematical models that simulate the structure and the function of the human brain. So I think a lot of work was done around how does the human brain work, and what can we do with mathematical models to simulate that and to simulate intelligence. And that is where we got this whole area of deep learning. And you'll see this again in your day-to-day. I'm almost afraid to say it because I think every device that I'm wearing or in my room is going to pipe up, but you can say, hello, Google, or whatever device it is. And that's deep learning, and it's being able to understand wake-up words and also be able to understand text and understand speech and return that as back as text. But you can see that as handwriting recognition, real-time speech to text, transcribing, and those types of things. So again, we're seeing those a lot in our day-to-day, but these are very fundamental technologies which have really moved forward the capabilities of AI. And then we're at where we're at now. So I guess with 2021, we started to hear whispers of things like generative AI. And this is the thing that's really captured people's attention. And generative AI, we've kind of got the whole ChapGPT thing. And that's where people's first kind of introduction to generative AI. Let's create new written and new visual, auditory experiences and things like that. So you've no doubt played around with ChapGPT and you type in something and it comes back with a prompt. Or maybe you've tried out Bing and DALL-E and you've created some interesting artwork, things like that. So that's kind of where we've got to today with generative AI. And we've got a number of models out there which are very capable. And I always like to think about, when I think about generative AI, there's actually two things kind of going on. You're typing in text, and that text is what's called a prompt. And you've got AI that can understand the context or the semantic understanding or the intent of that question, and then return back some text to you or an image to you that kind of makes sense within the context that you've given the AI models. Okay, so the next thing we'll talk about is OpenAI, the organization, and Microsoft, the organization, because they are two distinct entities. And that's really important to understand. So OpenAI, they have a vision statement around ensuring artificial general intelligence benefits humanity, and Microsoft empower every person on the organization, the planet to achieve more, etc. Now, what Microsoft and OpenAI are doing is that we are collaborating to build advanced AI models. So OpenAI have got the focus around their organization is building these models, and the focus of Microsoft in this context is around building the supercomputer infrastructure for the folk in the OpenAI world to be able to build models on that infrastructure, because as you can imagine, you need a huge amount of compute capability and access to a huge amount of data to be able to build these models. So that's the relationship. So it's a collaborative relationship, advanced AI. Microsoft is building out the supercomputer platforms for these models to be built on and for those models to be executed on. Because as you can imagine, when you're using these models, there's a lot of processing power that is going on to make the predictions as to what the next word in a sentence might be or things like that. So the other important thing about this is that there is the openai.com, and in there you'll see a number of models. You'll see ChapGPT and GPT-4 and various models. Those same models are running in Azure. So you'll see inside Azure OpenAI service, you'll see ChatGPT, GPT-4, you'll see DALL-E and things like that, and Codex models. So there are two distinct organizations. You can run the models either on the openai.com or within the kind of security and infrastructure and enterprise promises of Azure and Azure OpenAI. So that's kind of how that fits together. And these are the models that we're predominantly that we're talking about. So the first kind of models that kind of captured people's attention were what are called conversational models, where we had GPT 3.5. We have text. And now what we're getting to is more conversational models, chat conversation. And I'll show you examples of these, but these kind of come under the realm of ChatGPT and GPT-4 are what kind of more conversational based. We've got Codex around generating code, and we've got DALL-E there for generating images. So as I mentioned, the models that have been built by OpenAI are running in Azure OpenAI Service. So you have access to all the same models. They're what are called large language models. They're pre-trained, what are called foundational AI models, of which that you can also go and customize them and tune them should you need to for your data. But often we encourage people to look at prompting rather than tuning, but that's all. We might get back to that later on. Okay, so we've got various models over here. So we've got what we call generative text models, and they have varying capabilities and varying price models and things like that. So GPT 3.5, I think it has about 4 models that support it. We've got GPT-4, which is currently in preview. We've got ChatGPT, which you probably had an opportunity to play around with. So those are what are called generative text models. Then we've got Codex. So Codex is a specialized model, and that's for generating code. And you might have seen this, and you might have seen various reports done where Codex is almost magical. If you're a software developer and you're using it for things like Copilot or GitHub Copilot, it's almost magical because it kind of almost second guesses what you're trying to do. And it's a huge productivity boost. And we've also got things like DALL-E, which are generative image models. So you can go and describe something. I'm going to show you an example. I often use generative image models. I've used it for some technical campaigns and where I've wanted some interesting imagery work for work that I've been doing, but I also use it for my kind of personal life. And if I'm thanking somebody, I will generate I don't know, a superhero of a cook or something like that and thank them like that. So I kind of use it in lots of different ways, personally. Okay, so I've mentioned the word prompt a number of times, and that's pretty key in what we call in this whole generative AI world. And you can see some different types of prompts. In fact, I'm just going to go for the build. So you can see over here on the left-hand side, we've got a prompt. And a prompt is something as simple as write a tagline for an ice cream shop. And the response back from the GPT 3.5 model in this case would be, we serve up smiles with every scoop. Now, it's not always going to be that, because you can change what's called the temperature. So you can change the creativity of these models, and these models will bring back the really important thing about these are statistical models that are making predictions about the next word, and they're statistical, and by that nature it will vary. So that's what's called a completion. And then the next one over here, we've got what's called a chat completion. So this is more chat orientated. So the example here would be, hey, look, I'm having trouble getting my Xbox to turn on. And the response could be, there are a few things you can try to troubleshoot the issues. And you get some information, and that's great. And then the prompt would be, thanks, that worked. What games would you recommend for my 14-year-old? But you can kind of see it's a conversational thing. I'm going to get to this in a moment. The other thing we will talk about is what we talked about, codecs. And this example here, this is a prompt. I want to generate a SQL query. So that's for a database backend that might be supporting a system. And you might go and describe what the table looks like. And you say, in this case here, create a SQL query for all the customers in Texas named Jane. And this would come back and say, this is the query you need. And again, huge productivity boost. And I've already mentioned DALL-E. Okay, so where does Azure AI, how does everything fit together? When you think about Microsoft and the products and services that you're using day to day, how do all these things with AI and various Office and Microsoft 365 and Dynamics, how do they fit together? So what you'll notice, or what you would have almost certainly would have read about, is that Microsoft is in the process of infusing AI into pretty much everything we're doing. So if you're using Word or Excel or PowerPoint, you'll see that AI is going to become more prevalent in those solutions, in those applications. And if you think about it, if you think about, I'm in a Word document, and you need to go and create a job description. Now, a lot of that's boilerplate. So if you think about it, you'll be able to say, tell Office, or you'll be able to tell Word, I want to create a job description. And then ChapGPT will go off, or GPT-4, whatever model is supporting it, and they'll come up and say, well, here's a template. And we all know it's much easier to start with a template, to say, okay, well, this is basically the structure of this document. Okay, that looks about right. I've set a job description for a software developer with C# skills and Python skills. And then it will go off and generate this. And you'll say, well, okay, that's not quite right. That doesn't quite fit that. But you've got a great starting point. And that is the beauty of seeing the AI, again, infusing its way all the way through all these applications. Excel, you might be an absolute whiz in Excel, and you might be able to create formulas and functions and things like that. I'm personally not. And I go into Excel and I kind of know what I want to be able to do, but I don't necessarily know how to do it. And the ability to be able to say, hey, look, I want to be able to describe what I want to know, create a pivot table and create these charts and things like that. It'll be easy. It's great to be able to say, look, this is what I want to do, and have Excel go and generate that for you. So that's the kind of thing you can do. Now, the question was, I just spotted saying, can I share PowerPoints? Yes, I will. I'll figure out a way to do this, but we will be able to share the PowerPoints. So we've got the same thing for Dynamics. You'll find it's AI is being infused into Power BI, Power Apps, Automate, etc. Now, we've also got what we call other services. So we've got what we call applied AI services. Now, out of that, the most popular ones and the ones you might have heard of are things like cognitive search, hugely popular inside organizations, where you want to be able to index like all your PDF documents, all your PowerPoints, or all your Word documents, or a whole range of that, and then you want to be able to find them. And we have this called cognitive search, and it supports something called semantic search, or what I call more intent-based search. So it provides a very powerful way of which you can go and index, and then index for intent. So it makes it very powerful when you go and search for documents that you might have inside an organization. Another one that's very popular is things like form recognizer. Now, we all invariably deal with forms. And each country has dealt with this differently, but certainly in Australia, we've all had to fill in forms every time we went and had a COVID jab. So forms are still part of our day-to-day existence. But we have AI and Form Recognizer, which is there to be able to automate extracting content from forms and then passing that through into some back-end business process. So again, really powerful scenarios or solutions for really day-to-day problems. And then we've got what we call customizable models. So we've got models for vision, being able to understand what's in the context of an image and things like that. We've got speech. We have fantastic models for speech to text and things like that. Language, being able to understand things like sentiment. And then we've got things like Azure OpenAI Service. And that kind of fits in this world of cognitive services. And at the bottom layer in that, we have something called Azure Machine Learning. And that's really for a data scientists and machine learning engineers who are going to go out there and build models. So within the organization, maybe you want to go and build a machine learning model to fit some sort of data. You've got some data set and you want to go and build an algorithm that matches to that data set. So those are kind of the services. So we're going to cut the top two layers are kind of more for business, and the bottom three layers are more for data scientists and developers, machine learning experts. Now, we've talked all about this fantastic possibilities of AI and generative AI and things like that. What I want to talk about next is really kind of what we call responsible AI. Now, I think we have all seen within the press, and there's always articles about saying that the dangers of AI and things like that. And of course, there have been lots of examples where introduction of AI has gone wrong. And that's been something very much recognized. So I think it was back in 2016, I've got some notes here, 2016, Microsoft introduced a bot called Tay. Now, some of you might remember it. And it didn't take long for people to start getting that model to spew out hate speech. And that's obviously not what we want. There are also examples where we've seen this within law enforcement, where they've taken historic models of behavior and crime statistics and things like that, and then use those to go and train models to predict future crimes. Now, the challenge with that, of course, is that they often had bias in them. So they had human bias, typically. There might be a certain part of the population that the police enforcement thought were more likely to commit crimes. So those crimes and people committing those crimes were more likely to find their way into data sets. And then, of course, if you go and use those data sets to train up models, then all you're doing is reinforcing human bias. So we don't want that within AI. So we're doing the very best we can to ensure that data sets that are being used to train up these models fall under this category of what we call responsible AI. That the data sets and the ways in which these models are trained are fair, they're inclusive, so they include across the population. We should be able to look at the accountability. How was this model generated? What are the factors we used? What are the capabilities of this model? Or more correctly, what is this model not good at doing? Because it's really easy to assume that, hey, this model can do anything. Fairness of the data. Does this represent all the cross-section of community? Or does does it have bias in there? And again, we've all seen bias in every part of our lives, be it crime or be it going to the bank or trying to get a job or whatever it might be. We all see these biases, and what we're trying to do is make sure that those biases are not reflected in the AI models that we're going to be using day to day. So what we have is we have Microsoft's responsible AI principles, and there are 6 principles. And I encourage you to go search for responsible AI principles. And there is a link down the bottom there if you want to take a screenshot of that, and that you'll link off to a document. Now, it's all very well having these principles, but it's also very useful to have a set of guidelines and policies and tools to help us implement these responsible AI principles. So within Azure, you will find, particularly Azure Machine Learning, you will find in there a whole set of tooling that make it easier for you to understand the data sets that you're using when you're training these models. And for example, it would tell you saying, oh, this section of your data is not representative. You know, this section here, it represents 30% of your data, but it's not particularly representative. So you get some fantastic tools in there to actually look at your data and understand what you can do. So I would encourage you to go to that link at the bottom, and it would take you through a process and introduce you to more about those tools and how they can be used. So the next thing we're going to talk about is, so we talked about responsible AI. Next thing about is, you hear this time and time again, Microsoft runs on trust. This only works if you trust what Microsoft's doing, what OpenAI is doing, responsible AI, the data that's being used, etc. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is a question that often comes up. It's okay, I've got my data in my Azure subscription, and I'm using it maybe to fine tune a model. Does that mean that Microsoft or OpenAI are going to be using my data? Because I don't want Microsoft or OpenAI to be using my data. And what I want to confirm or really emphasize is that your data is your data. It is not being used to train up any models. So it's super important, because you might have sensitive data or whatever. You do not want that data to be used for training. So we want to emphasize, this is mainly about emphasizing that your data, when you're using your data for these models, fine-tuning, whatever it might be, it is not being used to train foundational AI models. And the other thing, and I kind of touched on this before, is we've got OpenAI as an organization, and we've got Microsoft where you can go and run these models. And the important differentiation behind that is that when you're running them inside Azure, you're getting all the security and enterprise promises of Azure. So you're getting things like encrypted storage, encrypted keys, you're getting private networks, you're getting all the security controls that you're used to, that enterprises need and demand when they're running these AI models. So hopefully that understands. So one, we're not using your model, so your data's safe, not being used for foundational models, and your data and your communications, your security, your keys, all these things here are also protected as part of the day-to-day, what you expect from Azure. Alrighty, so OpenAI model considerations. So a question you need to ask yourself, well, is OpenAI something that we need inside my startup or my organization, or I want to experiment with? So the general kind of questions like, do I need a general purpose model that can handle multitasks? Things like translation, entity recognition, sentiment analysis, things like that. I need to generate human-like context while preserving data privacy. So things like summarization, content writing, paraphrasing, things like that. I need rapid prototyping, quick time to market, models, little low training, etc. So we're going to go through it. If those are the kinds of things you're looking to do, then OpenAI is quite possibly the thing that you should be looking at. If you're trying to do things like, I want to go and do speech to text, well, no, you'd go and use a model that's much more geared around that. We have models and that AI that can do that for you. But you might end up with text at the end of that process, and that text might be something that you might then go and feed into OpenAI. So what I'm trying to say is OpenAI is not the only kid on the block. there are other scenarios like vision, speech AI, language models, decision models, that together you might use either individually, but you might use them in unison with something like OpenAI Service. So hopefully that makes sense. Those are kind of scenarios, but very often you're going to be using other models to kind of augment what you might want to do with OpenAI services. And to kind of give you a bit of a kind of top capabilities. And this scenario is really around call center analytics. And you might want to go and generate automatic, you might have a bot, and you might have that bot go and generate an automatic response back to a customer. Or you might want to customize the UI based on the customer's questions and things like that. Again, in call center, where you just think about the huge volume of voice that's coming into a call center, being able to convert that into text, and then be able to pass that model into OpenAI and say, hey, look, can you summarize that for me? Or can you bring out the salient top points for that? And then pop that information into your customer response CRM system. So those are the kind of capabilities for summarization, can be incredibly powerful. To say, look, here's a couple of pages of text, bring out the salient points of that. Code generation, I've already mentioned that before, and semantic search, being able to understand the intent of a question. And that's really the power of this. We talk about semantic search, what I like to call intent-based search, which is understanding the intent of that question, not necessarily with the way you worded it, but what does this question really mean? And then mapping that down into the data that's sitting behind these systems to be able to support that. And again, end-to-end call centers, classification, sentiment analysis, entity extraction. These are the kinds of things that you can do with OpenAI. And I've got an example here. So this would be, you think about, I mentioned before about forms. Okay, so we've got a whole document, set of documents that we've got inside a data store somewhere. We could go and use something like Form Recognizer to extract the text of that. We grab all the text. We go and index that with cognitive search, and then we create an index behind that. And then the end user comes along and puts a question in there saying, okay, look, I've got a question. We send that question across, and then what we go into the index, the search index, and we grab relevant content from, in this case, cognitive search. Not the only way you can do this, but you could do this with cognitive search. And we kind of augment that data, that query, with data that's relevant to the data that's inside your organization. And what we call this is grounding with your data. So you'll see this in a lot of documentation. What does grounding mean? Well, it means I've got a fairly generic question. A question comes in, for example, I've got an end user wanting to know more information about insurance policies, and particularly around what cover for eyewear. Okay, that's great. So the end user said, tell me more about your insurance policies for eyewear. And then what I would do is I'd have the back-end documents that support the policies, etc., inside the insurance company, and I would use that data to ground that query. So I'd ground that query with some data that's relevant to the business, and then I would get that data and I'd add that data to that prompt, and then I'd send that prompt, which has got the original question on it, but plus some additional data that I've got from my organization's back-end data stores. I'm passing that into OpenAI. I've created this kind of like a super prompt, pass that through OpenAI, and then I've got the response. And then I've got a response that's useful back to the end user, that's got data that's relevant to your organization, the systems that they're supporting that query. So that's exactly an example of how that works. Call center analytics, I've kind of touched on this already. Huge amount of voice data, do speech to text, store that data away, index that text. You could go and use queries. You could populate the CRM, or you could have a user-generated query. Tell me about the status of this customer, where are they at, what were the main issues in that, etc. So incredibly powerful to be able to go and use OpenAI to go summarize these speech to text, and then go and store it away in a CRM system, or look at what sentiment it is, or what are the issues that customers are facing. So comparison of models. Going to talk a bit about here around ChatGPT. So if you're going to start, the place to start is really around ChatGPT. Should be your first point of call. It's also the most economical. Next port of call, you should be looking at GPT version 4, which is currently in preview. It has significantly improved capabilities, but kind of think about ChatGPT as your starting point. It's the most economical model. Figure out if that's going to work, and then move on to GPT-4 with what you want to do, and then look at other models. So maybe that's not doing, but there are other. So for example, at the moment, GPT 3.5 is also deployed into data centers in Western Europe. That might be critical for you. You might have some use case specific examples. Alrighty, I'm just going to take a quick look at some of the questions. So just give me a moment. Probably going to come back to some of these. They might get a bit further down. Okay, so we've got customizing models. In fact, I think someone's got, yeah. So I'm going to talk a bit more about what we call grounding. So we've got these models. We've got your internal data that you've indexed. That you index your data sources, and then you're going to be using your prompts. So you'll come along. I'm going to type my fairly generic question that I'm going to use your data within the scope of your application, within your organization, and then you're going to pass it through into the OpenAI models, which you're going to then respond back with text that's relevant to that question, which is grounded in the data within your organization. And that's kind of how that works. And I'm going to talk a bit about some of the key terms that you'll see within this. So we've got, in this case here, this has got an email. So we've got an extract from an email with an address. And we've got the prompt. So this case here, this is a text, so text input. And then we've got what's called a prompt. The prompt in this case here is extract the mailing address from this email. And you'll see that this is the body of the email. And you'll see through here that we've got the email address. So we've got the mailing address. And you can see down here, this is what's called in red. This is what's called a completion. And again, I'm going to show you an example of this in a moment. Now, the other thing you'll see is tokens. And again, what's a token? The first time I saw about this, well, what on earth's a token? Now, a token is a word, or typically part of a word. So for example, thought might be broken down into a number of tokens. Maybe it's into syllables or something like that. There is a tokenization process, and there are tokenization libraries, and you can kind of see what's happening behind it. But tokens are just basically words or partial words, or maybe a sequence of numbers or things like that. And it just makes it easier for the model to scale better effectively when you're using tokens. So that's what a token is. It's a word or a part of a word that gets fed into a model. And you remember what's happening is that these tokens are being fed into a model, and then a prediction is being made based on these models as to what is the most likely, next likely token to return back in a sequence. So that's what's kind of going on. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is just kind of go for a very quick demo and give you a bit of a sense of how some of these things work. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go into what's called, what's called the Azure AI Studio. And inside that, there is something called the playground. Now, there are two places here you mostly start off with. So the first thing I want to point out actually is I have deployed models, OpenAI models, into my subscription. So inside the playground, this playground is associated with my subscription and the models that I've deployed. And you'll see that I've got a number of models that I've deployed. I've deployed 4 models. And the one I'm going to be using is DaVinci model version 3. And I'm going to do a completion. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to paste in happy birthday to you. Now, happy birthday to you is going to generate the most likely statistical response is going to be happy birthday to you, happy birthday to you, happy birthday dear, etc. So that's just, remember, there's a statistical model running in the background and it's making a prediction, and the most likely prediction for that is going to be happy birthday to you. Now, just say, and this is a bit of an aside, but we'll just give you some of the idea of the power of these models. I might say translate to French and go and generate that. And it'll come back. This is not the way you'd sing this in French, but this is the French translation for happy birthday to you. So you can see there's some quite capable models, quite capable capabilities in there. I can also go and look at view the code. If I go and look at view the code, you can see I've got some sample code in here, which will get you up and running using the OpenAI models. And you'll see there's C#, curl, etc., and JSON. So we basically help you to go and get started building applications behind this. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to delete that out, and we'll pop back to the slide. And the next thing I want to talk about is context, and how within your prompt, and this is really the power of these models, is context. So instead of this time just saying happy birthday to you, I'm going to say happy birthday to you, and here's a great handbag gift idea. And I'm going to say generate. And what it's going to do, it's not going to come back with their happy birthday song. It's going to come back here and say, I'm sure any lady in your life will love a new handbag as a gift. So you can kind of see now I've changed the context, and it's coming back with some interesting text about this. And this might be something at the beginning of a plan, for example, or maybe something you want to put onto a blog. Now, if I take this whole idea a bit further, I'm just going to copy this over here. And then this time, what I'm going to tell the GPT 3.5, in this case, I'm going to tell it how I want it to behave. And in this case here, I'm going to say, act as a marketing assistant and write a marketing plan and a fun tweet for happy birthday to you, and here's a great handbag idea. And we're going to click on generate. And now what we'll see is that this will come back with a marketing plan. And again, as I mentioned around that word example, now you've got a great starting point for a potential campaign that you might want to. In this case, it was handbags, etc. But it comes out with some useful information. Okay, there's a target audience that's kind of useful. And down here, here's a fun tweet. It's your special day, celebrate and style with a new handbag. So you hopefully kind of get the general idea about how this is working. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is go onto another demo that I've got. Now, this demo, this was kind of slightly more on the business-oriented one. This demo here is kind of getting a bit more on the technology side about how you can use these within your apps. So what I'm going to do now is go across into something called chat completion. So I'm going to select chat completion. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to set a system prompt when the screen pops up. Okay, so you saw me copy that message. So I was pasting that in the wrong place. Okay, so that's jumping around a bit. What I've got over here is I've got a system message. And that system message says, you are an assistant designed to extract entities from text. Users will paste in a string of text and you respond with an entity. Now, the example would this be that you might have done speech to text, and they might have said my name, company, phone number, etc., would be embedded into that text. And what I want to be able to do is extract that and some useful data that I can flow into my application. So that's what I've done there. So I've set a system message, which is setting context for this chat. So I'll confirm that. So I've basically saved that. Okay, so the next thing I want to go and do is I want to go and put in some text. So imagine this text is again coming from a call center application. Someone's put an email. So I put in the user message, and the user message in there was, hi, my name is Robert Smith. I'm calling from Contoso. I'm interested in learning about blah, blah, blah. Can you please call me back on this phone number? And etc. So that's what the chat was. So I go across to the playground and I send that message to the model. And remember, I've set a context. I've said that you're an entity extractor. And here I'm getting back a bit of JSON. And here's the entity. And again, this would then flow through my system. So you can imagine I'm a bot or something like that, or you've got email coming through or whatever this, however this message is flowing through. And you can now start extracting stuff out of that you might want to flow into your system. And inside here, I can view the code. And you can see this is the code that made up this chat. And I can look at the raw version of this. And you can see I've got a role, which is system, and there goes this setting the context, and then a role of user. Now, what's really important to understand here is that these models do not maintain state. They do not understand context. So what happens when you're communicating with these models, you're re-establishing the context for this chat. And then, so what's basically happening, every time you're chatting with us, you're sending the system message, you're resending this user message, and you're resending this a user message, and then the assistants come back. So what's happening back is that there's no context or state that's being held in these models. You're re-establishing state every time you communicate back with these models. Okay, so the next model, so I'm just going to clear that chat. And the next model, next demo I'm going to show, again, this is definitely getting more into the world of geeky. But this one here, and I have to confess, I stole this one from a demo that I first saw on YouTube. And I remember thinking, how on earth is this working? Why does this work? So this case here is, imagine you're a Microsoft SQL Server, I type a command and you reply with the results and no other information or description, just the result. Okay, so I'm going to set that as a system message. I'm going to come back over here to the playground and I'm going to set the playground up here and I'm going to save this. So I've told it, I'm telling the model that I'm using, the ChapGPT model, that I now want you to think that you are a Microsoft SQL Server. And then I'm going to come back over here. I'm going to put an exec, who am I? So this is just a standard bit of SQL Server. Whoops. Okay, I'm going to exec something called who am I? And it's going to come back, say, domain username. That's fair. And you might be thinking to myself, well, why is this? Because ChapGPT isn't a SQL Server. What's going on? And what's happened is that ChapGPT and all these models have been trained on the documentation for SQL Server, so the SQL Server documentation. And it knows if you go and do that, the most likely outcome of that would be the domain and username. Okay, so I come across here and I go exec databases. Oops. I'm going to paste this in. And what it's going to do, remember, it's a statistical model, and these are the most likely databases that you will find from the documentation. So I've got master, etc. So these are a fair examples of the type of database you'd have in there. Okay, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a database. I come across here, and I'm going to paste create database customer. And I'm going to do that, so that's completed successfully. And I'm going to say, I'm going to use this. So if you were a database person, you would know about this. So I'm going to use the customer database. And that's great. I've changed the context to that. That's perfect. I'm going to create a database. And the database I'm going to create is called users. And it's going to have age and name. Those are the fields in this database. That's been created successfully. I'm now going to do an insert. Come across there. Insert that. And then, okay, that worked successfully. Now I'm going to come across here and I'm going to say select for more users and paste that in. And it'll come back and say that I've found Kit, where that was the user I just inserted. So again, what I want to get across with this demo is that context matters. And you can see what I'm doing. There's a chat, I'm adding context, and these models, they have an understanding of SQL and the documentation, and this is the most likely outcome behind that. If I go and look at the raw data, you can see that this is the conversation or the chat that's been happening. Every time I put in a chat, I'm reestablishing context with the model, and it's coming back with the most likely set of text that I would expect. So it's not a database server. It's just saying this is the most likely thing that I would expect to see within the database from a database query. So that's kind of interesting. That's one I like. Now, the last one I'm going to show you, if you've played around with this already, where is it? Over here. Now, this is DALL-E. And the one I like to do, so this is DALL-E. So this will do is generative image. So I can come along here and say, draw a superhero cook in the style of pop art. So I'm, again, putting in context. And you'll see I've got creative mode set on. So you can all use this. You just go to bing.com and you select chat. And what it will do is it'll come off there. You'll get a bit of a prompt to say your image has been generated. It'll tell you a bit about what it's going to do. So it's going to create a style of pop art. It'll even tell you a bit about, hey, pop art is a movement that emerged in the 1950s and 60s, characterized a bit of a keep you interested in why this is being generated. And you can see, hey, look, I've now got a superhero cook, and we'll pick this one. And that's kind of what's going on. So again, you're free to use this. It's part of Bing, and it's a fantastic service. I've used this for both for work, and I use this both for just general day-to-day as well. So it's kind of fun. Alrighty. So we've done that. Alrighty. So the next thing we're going to talk about is just some things to think about it. Now, I've said this a couple of times, and it's deliberate. The really important thing to remember is that OpenAI and these models, ChapGPT, though they might seem like human at their capabilities, and that's part of their interest, it's really important to remember that they are AI models, they're mathematical models, they're statistical models, and they're making a prediction as to what the next word or next token is going to be. So it's really important not to humanize what's going on, because it's ever so tempting. You look at these things and you start getting into this world about why is it behaving like this? It's really important to remember that generative AI, it is not intelligent, it is not deterministic, and it's not trustworthy. So those are really important things. Now, on the trustworthy angle, the way that I tend to think about this, I think about if you've got a business process, for example, that you want to automate. If it's low risk, and maybe it's a bot, and you just want to return back, information about a product, that's a relatively low risk activity. And that's probably fine with something like that. So you think low risk, automate with AI, but high risk, collaborate with AI. So for example, maybe you're a doctor and maybe you're writing a referral, then you would not want to just have it automated. You would want to collaborate with it. You want to look at what it's generated. Does this make sense in the context of this patient that I'm seeing? And you want to collaborate with it and make sure that you're an expert in that field. Yes, this makes sense. But as you can imagine, as a doctor, with it being able to automatically generate this, again, a huge time saver, but it's a high risk scenario. So you want to collaborate with it. So that's what I kind of want to get across with that. And also always work with that responsibly. Now, we're also doing a lot of work around what we call content filtering. So in bing.com, you will notice, or you might have read about, there are content filters in there. We do not want people to be putting in hateful things, for example, or hateful things into these models and having them return models, hateful output. In the business context, you do not want these models that someone may, for whatever reason, be putting in hateful things inside an application, inside the context of a business, and having it returning back inappropriate content back into a business context. We do not want that. So what we have with you have these content filter models. You'll see that in Bing, and you'll also be able to use those in your solutions. So those are coming through at the moment into preview. So those are some of the things. And again, there's emphasis around responsible AI. Okay, so you might want to take a screenshot of this. So there's some useful resources there. So we've got the documents there. We've got services, how to go and build AI solutions, data and privacy around AI solutions, etc. and how generative models work. Really useful set of resources, so please fire away and take a screenshot of that. I'll leave it there for a moment and grab that. Okay, there's something called AI Business School. I again encourage you to take a screenshot of that. Some really useful resources for that down at microsoft.com/AI-business school. And you'll find, again, just take a screenshot of this and then go and search for some of these resources. You'll find a lot of content out there, some really well-regarded Microsoft Learn modules around introduction to Azure OpenAI. What does it mean? You'll see a lot of work around what's called prompt engineering, a lot of things like that. A lot of really great resources to get up and running to build applications. What I wanted just to kind of emphasize is I showed you the playground before in these demos. Keep in mind, the idea behind the playground is for you to test out ideas that will eventually find their way into applications. So this is a way in which you can go and test out your prompts. Is it kind of getting what I expect? Are these prompts working the way? But the ultimate goal behind this playground is for you to use that code that you can see over here and use these prompts that you have been playing around with to go and generate intelligent apps. That's fundamentally what the playground's around. So I didn't want you to think, oh, great, do end users go and use this? No, it's for people building apps, tuning the prompts, and getting those to work in a suitable way for applications. Okay, so I think that's pretty much what I wanted to cover. So next steps, go check out OpenAI Access, the aka.ms/OAI/access, and the access to resources. The first time you sign up for OpenAI services, you will also need to fill in a responsible AI form. As I said, we're super cautious about this, and you should be as well. We want to know what are your scenarios you could do. We don't need to know the infinite detail about it, but we just need to know that it's a reasonable thing to be doing with AI, and you're not out there to cause harm, basically. That's what we're trying to do. Okay, some questions on here. Okay, so what is the benefit of using Azure OpenAI over OpenAI? I think I probably answered that up front. The main difference is that Azure OpenAI is much more about enterprise readiness, all the security, all the things, the security promise that you'd expect when you're an enterprise using services in the cloud. You want to make sure you've got things encrypted, secure code, secure keys, your storage, your data is encrypted. Those are the things that we're doing behind OpenAI, Azure OpenAI. So hopefully that answers your question. You're completely free to use OpenAI. No one's saying don't use it, but just remember that if you're building solutions for enterprise or you're a startup building for enterprise, enterprises are probably going to be wanting those models to run in the context of their Azure subscription with all the things that they want and expect from Azure. So hopefully that answers that question. Yeah, so when you go and sign up for Azure, OpenAI, I mentioned that you need to do responsible AI. There's a question here. What role do you think third-party assurance has a part to play in the AI industry? And I would suggest it actually has a strong role to play. So, for example, there are a lot of open source projects that are there to look at responsible AI and the fairness of data that you're using to train your models. So if you go into Azure AI Machine Learning Studio and you go into the responsible AI dashboard, you will see that there are a lot of OpenAI models that you can use there to look at your data and to look at your data and understand the fairness. Now, that is absolutely open source, third-party models and solutions, which are playing a very active part in the process of building models, which are hopefully going to benefit humanity. So that would be an example there. So I would say there's a big part to play with that. You'll also see, and sorry, I quite remember, we have just announced a build, an open set of, it's a marketplace, if you want, of OpenAI, sorry, of open source models that you can run in Azure. So we absolutely recognize that there is some fantastic work that's going on in the open source world, and we want to make sure that everyone gets to benefit from that. And so those models, you can run those in Azure, etc. So there's a tooling, OpenAI, there's a tooling for AI to make sure around responsible data. And there's also these open source models, which are just amazing out there. So the question is the Azure OpenAI service only available to applications to Azure enterprise customers? Are non-enterprise customers able to use this? Yes, non-enterprise customers are able to use the services as well. Yes, so yeah, definitely. Yeah, okay, so I think I answered that question. Okay, so
I think that's probably about it, Dave.
I think so as well. Yeah.
Well, look, thank you very much, Dave. Incredible session, lots of information. I've put up on the screen some extra learning for people. If they want to continue their learning, they can scan those QR codes, and I'll take you through to some more learning paths and modules around Azure OpenAI. But on that, I would like to thank Dave Glover for joining us, for delivering such a fantastic talk. And this will be available on YouTube if you've missed something on the Microsoft Reactor YouTube. So jump on and catch up on anything you've missed. But with that, I bid you a good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Michael. And thank you much for joining us for tonight or this morning or evening or wherever you are in the world for this session. Thank you very much.
Thank you.